A young paramedic rushes a critically ill patient into the emergency room, confident that the hospital is where healing happens, where doctors save lives. But in this hospital, at this moment, one of those doctors is actually a serial killer who's been systematically poisoning patients for years, watching them suffer and die, all while maintaining the respected facade of a medical professional dedicated to saving lives. This isn't a horror movie plot. This is the true story of Dr. Michael Swango, a licensed physician who used his position of trust and authority to murder an estimated 60 people, possibly more, across multiple states and even internationally. He didn't kill out of mercy or to end suffering. He killed because he enjoyed it, because he was fascinated by death, and because his medical degree gave him unprecedented access to vulnerable victims and the means to kill them without immediate suspicion. For over 2 decades, Swango moved from hospital to hospital, leaving a trail of unexplained deaths that weren't connected until it was far too late for dozens of victims. Welcome back to Crime Scout, True Stories. The case of Dr. Michael Swango represents one of the most disturbing betrayals of medical ethics in modern history, a physician who violated every principle of his profession and exploited the trust patients place in doctors. Today we're examining how he got away with murder for so long, the warning signs that were ignored, and the systemic failures that allowed a predator to practice medicine. Michael Swango was born in 1954 in Tacoma, Washington. He grew up in a military family. His father was a decorated Army officer who served in Vietnam. By all accounts, Swango had a difficult relationship with his father and struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He attended Quincy College in Illinois and later Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, graduating in 1983. During medical school, his classmates noticed disturbing behavior. Swango kept a scrapbook of disasters and fatal accidents, collecting gruesome photographs and news clippings about death and destruction. He seemed fascinated by suffering in a way that made others uncomfortable. But these were dismissed as the dark humor medical students sometimes develop as a coping mechanism for dealing with death and disease. What his classmates didn't know was that Swango's fascination went far beyond morbid curiosity. He was already experimenting with poison. During his time in medical school, several of his colleagues became mysteriously ill after eating food Swango had prepared or drinks he'd offered them. The illnesses were severe but temporary, and nobody made the connection that Swango might be deliberately poisoning people. After graduating medical school, Swango began his internship at Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. Almost immediately, nurses and staff began noticing a disturbing pattern. Patients under Swango's care seemed to suffer unexpected cardiac arrests and deaths at an alarming rate. Nurses started calling him 00 Swango, a reference to James Bond's License to Kill. But these concerns were largely dismissed as dark humor or statistical coincidence. Swango completed his internship, and despite the whispers, he received his medical license. His first confirmed poisoning occurred in 1984 when he was working as a paramedic in Illinois while applying for residency positions. Several of his fellow paramedics became violently ill after consuming food and drinks Swango had provided. The symptoms were consistent with arsenic poisoning. One of the victims saved a partially consumed beverage, and it tested positive for arsenic. Swango was arrested and convicted of battery in 1985. He served 2 years in prison, a shockingly light sentence for poisoning multiple people. This is where the medical licensing system catastrophically failed. Despite being a convicted poisoner, Swango was able to obtain medical positions after his release from prison. He lied on applications, used false credentials, and exploited gaps in background checking systems. Hospitals failed to verify his credentials thoroughly, or they chose to overlook red flags because they were desperate for doctors, particularly in underserved areas. In 1989, Swango managed to secure a residency position at the University of South Dakota School of Medicine in Sioux Falls. He worked there for nearly 2 years before someone finally checked his background and discovered his criminal conviction. He was immediately dismissed, but by then, he'd had access to patients, and retrospective analysis of deaths during his tenure showed suspicious patterns. The truly horrifying phase of Swango's career came when he went international. Unable to secure positions in the United States due to his growing reputation, he falsified credentials and obtained medical positions in Zimbabwe in 1994 and 1995. Working at Neen Mission Hospital and later Mpilo Hospital, Swango had access to vulnerable patients in a healthcare system with less oversight than American hospitals. During his time in Zimbabwe, there was a significant spike in unexpected patient deaths. Families complained, nurses noticed patterns, but Swango left the country before a full investigation could be conducted. Estimates suggest he may have killed as many as 60 patients during his relatively brief time in Zimbabwe, though exact numbers are impossible to determine. Swango's method was typically poisoning. He had access to medications and chemicals through his medical position. He would inject patients with substances like potassium chloride or epinephrine in doses that would cause cardiac arrest. In medical settings, sudden cardiac arrests aren't immediately suspicious, particularly in patients who are already ill. Swango exploited this reality, killing people in a context where death was already present and expected to some degree. What drove Swango to kill? Psychiatric evaluations conducted later revealed he suffered from antisocial personality disorder. He lacked empathy and viewed other people as objects for his amusement or experimentation rather than as human beings with inherent worth. He kept journals detailing his crimes, describing his victims' suffering in clinical terms, analyzing their deaths like scientific experiments. He seemed to derive satisfaction from having the power of life and death, from playing God in the most literal and horrifying sense. The FBI finally caught up with Swango in 1997 when he attempted to re-enter the United States using fraudulent credentials to take a position at a hospital in Saudi Arabia that would have allowed him to continue his killing spree. He was arrested at Chicago O'Hare International Airport on fraud charges. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered the full scope of his crimes. They found his journals, which contained detailed descriptions of poisoning victims. They exhumed bodies of patients who died under suspicious circumstances during his various medical positions. They interviewed survivors, families, and colleagues who'd witnessed his behavior. In 2000, Michael Swango pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, specifically killing patients at a Veterans Affairs hospital in New York where he'd briefly worked in the 1990s. He also pleaded guilty to fraud and making false statements. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors chose to charge him with only 3 murders because they had the strongest evidence for those cases, but they believe he killed many more, possibly dozens, over his medical career. The Swango case exposed catastrophic failures in the medical licensing system. How did a convicted poisoner obtain multiple medical positions? How did hospitals fail to perform adequate background checks? How did the pattern of deaths not trigger investigation sooner? The answer is a combination of institutional negligence, poor communication between licensing boards, Swango's skill at deception, and the tendency to give doctors the benefit of the doubt even when warning signs are present. Following Swango's conviction, reforms were implemented. The National Practitioner Data Bank was strengthened to better track physicians with problematic histories. Background check requirements for medical positions were enhanced. International credential verification became more rigorous. But these reforms came too late for Swango's victims. This case also raised uncomfortable questions about the culture of medicine. Why were concerns raised by nurses and colleagues so often dismissed? Why is there sometimes a reluctance to question a physician's judgment or behavior? The hierarchical nature of medicine, the authority granted to doctors, and the presumption of their benevolent intentions all contributed to Swango's ability to operate undetected for so long. Michael Swango remains in federal prison, serving multiple life sentences. He's now 70 years old. The exact number of his victims will never be known. Many died in contexts where exhumation is impossible or impractical. Others were cremated. Some died in countries with less robust death investigation systems. Conservative estimates place his victim count at around 35 to 60, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. This has been Crime Scout, True Stories. Dr. Michael Swango betrayed everything the medical profession stands for, using his position to harm rather than heal. His case reminds us that credentials and professional status don't guarantee character, and that vigilance and accountability are essential in any field where people hold power over others' lives. Subscribe for more cases that expose the darkness that can hide behind respectability and the importance of questioning authority when something doesn't seem right.